Welcome back, fellow sleuths. We have come to the end of the Severance journey, for now. But with marching bands, animatronics, and goats galore, the season 2 finale went out with a bang, and in true Severance fashion, it answered as many questions as it asked. So let's dig into what happened, and more importantly, where the story may go, since season 3 is already in the works.
And now we're going to have to start at the end, obviously. We know there's been a lot of talk around whether or not any Mark S was wrong for his decision making, but even just based on the rest of this episode, let alone the rest of the season, we feel it's pretty fair to say that he was just sharing the sentiment that whether he chose to be created or not, they still have a claim to a life.
That's a good question. It's probably the main question of the episode. Rob and I talk a lot about what we're going to say offline before we record, but we have not talked about this. So, Rob, do you think the Innies are people that deserve their own life?
Oh, am I going to surprise Chris with this? I'm not sure. I My answer is yes. I think at this point there has been enough of a consciousness created that to just completely ignore the fact that they exist, kind of, if you will, to the point of Mark Scout asking his innie to just sacrifice, is more of an ask than maybe the Audis are thinking it is. And short answer, yes.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think they're people, and I think it throws up moral questions about what happens to Gemma and all these Innies if they were to shut down Lumen, or if Gemma just was to leave with all 25 or 26 people that she's gotten in her brain right now. They deserve as much of a life as anybody else does, in my opinion.
I think the other piece to it is they're also not being asked to be created when the split happens, which is also where it comes from as well. It's not that there was some kind of sentient choice on their part to say, hey, I want to live this life. So I think that's where some of the gray area starts to go a little bit away for me. And then one thing you just touched on there, I think, is something we possibly agree on, but there could be some wiggle room of just when they're yelling at them leaving the testing floor about you'll kill them all. You mentioned those any personalities that were created for Gemma in all those rooms. I will say I think there's still some other possible theories that I could be open to, but the one that makes the most sense to me so far is he's talking about those personalities that will be gone if Gemma leaves. That he's so attached to specifically.
I agree. I think the all of them is the personalities he's created because we know he has a bit of an obsession with Gemma and probably multiple versions of Gemma, and that's who Mauer is the most worried about losing. We saw that an episode or two ago when he was in the Watcher's room, and Drummond's like, "You're gonna have to let her go," and yada yada yada. So yeah, I think there's definitely a bit of a dilemma on now what happens to the 25 people, because I know I saw some comments and other threads, and there's been tons of discussions on this, and that the 20, or at least some of the personalities, maybe not all 25, but some of these other consciousness are going through trauma all the time, whether you're in a dentist chair every second of your life, or you're in a plane crash every second of your life, or you're writing thank you cards so your hands bleed. Is there a point when not existing is better than existing? And I would ask myself the question that if I was to find someone that was being tortured in a basement, and that's all they ever knew, is it the moral act to just mercy unalive them, even though I have the option to release them and bring them out into the real world? Because there is a potential option that Gemma's personalities and all the Innies could go on some sort of rotation or reintegration, or there may be a version where they can coexist.
Yeah, honestly, I think that's a really heavy question that I don't know that I have the best answer to right now, but I'm sure they'll explore in season 3, which is one of the great things about this show is that we've got these mysteries, but really hits a lot of these emotional beats as well. But something you brought up that I would find curious is the potential for all of these personalities maybe having a chance, if you will. Like you said, maybe there's a cycle or however they would handle it. What are your thoughts on that though, of how even Gemma in particular maybe could even go about that, right?
So I think there's another moral question to be asked, that although these other personalities may deserve their own time in the sun, if you were to reintegrate and Gemma's brain now becomes flooded with the trauma that all of these other personalities have been going through, how just and fair is that for Gemma? Unless they told her ahead of time that they were going to do these things, if this was all a surprise and she had no idea that this was going to happen. Kind of like Mark said to Mark on his camera call, that they kind of told him the Innies are going to be happy, so I just trusted them. If Gemma got that same line, then it might not also be just for her to have night terrors for the rest of her life of all the things that her other 25 or 26 personalities went through. With that said, how could they balance it? I think the After Hours episode, that was also named from the Twilight Zone episode, The After Hours. At the end of the episode, if you haven't seen it, you find out that the woman in the beginning of the episode is a mannequin on the ninth floor. And there's multiple mannequins from inside the store, and she's getting back late from her monthly rotation. The game is that each mannequin gets a month out in the real world. And it kind of makes me think now, with Gemma out and 25 other personalities or mannequins in her mind, do each of them get their time in the sun? Is it kind of like the After Hours Twilight Zone episode where they get a month or a week or some sort of cadence where they all get to live their life like that? This is all given that the world's not shocked that a person that was in a car accident and dead is back, but just ethically, how would you handle Innies with multiple personalities, and how do you share that? I think the question should be asked: do they deserve some kind of rotation or visitation rights, I guess, with the real world?
And I think that's a question that now is definitely going to be the forefront. Also, if there is a way for that to happen for Gemma, right? So we were only in that position, we'll say now, because of Mark S still following through on part of his agreement, if you will. And well, let's not call it an agreement. There was definitely some animosity still there at the end of that conversation that they managed to have, which great idea with the camera, by the way. I was super impressed with that idea. He still managed to get Miss Casey at that point out the door into the hallway, which he didn't have to do that. He's clearly at a point now where, I know we've talked about offline, he's choosing to live, right? Because he could have very easily exited the door himself, assuming that that would have been the end of it. But he still went out of his way to make sure Miss Casey got out while still making the decision for himself to, continue whatever that life is that he does have.
Yeah, I think that Mark S did more than Mark Scout would have done for him based on the conversation that they had. I don't want to say he was lying, but he was definitely stretching the truth a little bit and sugarcoating what he was going to do. And I guarantee I'll go through with the reintegration process. But we all know that if he gets out with Gemma and Ragabi or whoever is going to help him with this tells him there's a 60% chance that he's a vegetable after that procedure and he has Gemma back, he's not doing it. And Mark S knows that. But I don't know if when he got to the door that it was him thinking about his own life. What it was a little bit, but I think once he saw Helly, he decided that gave him the push that her life and them being together was what pushed him, because he was really unsure about it for a second there. So I don't think it was just about him being alive, but I think him and Helly fighting that fight together is what drove him over the
Yeah,
edge to not go out the door.
it was at least worth that shot for them to have a chance versus just completely throwing it away in his mind, right? Like there could have been a chance that, to your point, Mark Scout, yeah, he does do it. Like I do think we have a good impression of both of these Mark characters, which I think something we've also obviously touched on was there was a bit of a letdown when we thought Mark S was not just going to go along with the plan because we're so used to just rooting for both characters. But what Mark Scout was asking was almost unreasonable. So it was, he actually made a valid decision for himself to try and stick it around for both of them, right? This is the path forward where maybe both of them make it.
Yeah, and a lot of people I know, I had seen comments like, "Where were they running to, and why are they doing that?" And yada yada yada. But they were just pulling a Bonnie and Clyde on this one. They were just together. Just I remember Ben Stiller. I think he said, or one of the showrunners had mentioned that these are just two people, and they're not sure if they have 10 minutes or 10 hours, but they're going to spend that time together, and they're just going to do it. And this like symbolic, just running together, kind of smiling. They're just going. They don't know where they're going. They know they're doing it together, and that's really all that mattered to them in that moment. I like, to your point, I like that ending of the season better than Mark going out and them on the lam with him and Gemma and Devin, which like you said before, we've seen that show before.
Mm-hmm.
This was a better way to take it, and now kind of flips the innie and the outie perspective. So now you have Gemma on the outside and Mark on the inside, and we'll definitely get to what James Egan said to Helly I think how he would prefer Heli R over Helena, and how that's or
Well,
Helena, and how
that's
it's going to
actually
work.
that's actually what I was just about to ask you about and kind of switch to a little bit here is obviously, like we said, we like where this ended. We see where this is going in season 3. Something you brought up, I know obviously we kind of agreed already on he even said he sees the fire of Kier in Heli when James goes to visit, but you phrased it in a way where I actually could see that relationship being the way I just mentioned Mark S making this decision that maybe he and Mark Scout both make it out, or even just he makes it out. This can kind of give us a path that it works out for Mark S, just based on where Heli might be going in season 3.
So I think that interaction between James and Heli R, and how he's like, I don't love my daughter, but I see Kier in you, and he's had plenty of shadow children and all this other stuff, which we kind of knew based off the security guard at the birthing retreat, how she's one of James, and it really emphasizes the cult leader mentality that he's, kind of doing whatever he wants to try to build that leadership hierarchy that he wants. But the interesting part was that I feel as if in season 3 we might see James Egan try to influence Heliar and keep her all the time, and make Helena the innie and push her to the back burner, because we've talked about this on multiple episodes before. There's almost no scene in the show where Helena is actually in power. She's either being reprimanded by her father, reprimanded by Drummond, reprimanded by Cobell. The only time she's ever in charge a little bit is when she's with Mark Scout, and and she says, I'm pretty much like in charge of the company. But that was just her tooting her own horn. I mean, she clearly is not in the position that she thinks she is. So what we were saying earlier is I'd be interested to see where the Innies go. I think the Innies are a good reflection of what the Audis were before their environments affected them
They
at it.
weren't corrupted by the outside world.
Exactly, but Lumen might see it as like the tempers haven't affected you yet, and this is what a childlike mind would be. They're still clean, but I think they're only clean. Like the question, I guess, would be, how moral are you when you start to have to make different choices? If someone offers you $1 million to do something, or $1 billion to do something, or $2 billion to do something, what is your price before you start to sell your soul and start to do things that aren't great? And I think that question might come up for LER, is she's all about the people now and the revolution now. But if all of a sudden James Egan's going to hand her the keys to the kingdom, how, strong is her moral standing then? Because she's never had to make that decision. She's always been part of the revolution. And I guess the question is, once the revolution wins, are they any better than the government was in charge before?
And I think to kind of put the bow on that, that's where we see if that does happen, this is our way out for both her and Mark S. Again, to your point, flipping it on its head a bit, where does that leave Mark Scout then, too? So I think that really sets us up for season 3, because I think we have a general idea of where season 3 can take us. Aside from them, we've got Gemma on the outside now. I think on a very high level, we both pretty much agree right off the bat. Episode 1, season 3, we're going to see Gemma get out of the extremely unsecured Lumon building. I'll
I
let
have
you.
no idea why they're so worried about this, Rob. I talked to you before this, and I'm like, why are they so worried? They don't know Drummond's dead yet, and they don't know that Milchick is behind a vending machine that apparently Dylan's like super, super strong now and can
Yeah,
just like toss around.
he's been working out with the local NFL team on the sleds.
Well, it's all his delts and traps because he's gonna be a bodybuilder as an Audi, right? So he's totally
Absolutely.
prepared to like move a vending machine like 15 feet. But they don't know any of that's happened yet, and there's only one elevator out. So I understand why they are annoyed that the test is now ruined, but I can't imagine they're so worried that she would leave. And I guess there's no other security guards there besides the dude that wanted you in. And I had mentioned too, I think it's probably because they're probably a little high on their own supply. They believe their own bullshit now, that they're like they have such control that they've put in lax measures because they just didn't think there was any way they wouldn't be in control. And now this is where we are, right? So that might be how she can get out and get into her getaway car.
Yeah, which we think obviously probably going to be Devin waiting in their orchestrated plan outside, but we'll be surprised by Mark not being accompanied, or Gemma not
Right.
being accompanied by Mark. So that's definitely going to more
Yeah.
than likely be where we kick off
I think Devin will know why too, because she already knows what Mark S was thinking in the cabin and like why he had some trepidations about doing this, and she
Right.
knows about Heliar and Cobell kind of knows. So when Gemma runs out and Mark's not there, and she's like, she went with some other person. And she's, I think Dylan or Devin's already going to know, and she can give her the 411 on the drive out because she already had that conversation with the Innie.
And yes, Gemma could meet up with Devin outside. Obviously, a family reunion of sorts. That's very nice. But Devin's also got a little bit of family that we haven't seen in a little while. Ricken is probably still click clacking away on his little typewriter for his Innie literature that he's been working on. But a lot of this writing he's been doing and a lot of imagery we've seen around Ricken is really starting to pique our interest a bit more than he was in the first two seasons, other than just being kind of a goofy guy.
Yeah, I mean, like I really don't have too much evidence for this. I just get the feeling we already kind of thought this. I think not just me and you, but like most of the fandom thought this that there's multiple illegitimate children out there for James. It wouldn't be that wild that Ricken is one of them. If you haven't listened to the audiobook for it, his story is basically his parents are like these super, I don't want to say edgy performers, but they do like that weird, like performance art. And his story is that his birth was part of the performance art, him being born, and they have like a name for the performance. And I apologize for not knowing it, and I probably should, but that's his birth story, that he was born out of necessity for performance. And it could just very well be that that was just a cover story because it's so ridiculous. And maybe they just adopted this child, or maybe this was a way for these people to get money. But I get the feeling based off a lot of the goat symbolism in their house and just the general vibe I get from Rickon, that there's just more to the story. And it wouldn't be that wild if he was one of the James Egan kids that James just wasn't impressed with. And
Especially given, like we've kind of said, they're always looking for these flashes of Kier in whoever is going to be probably this next successor or what he was going for, obviously. So um, there's definitely the fact that his words resonated so strongly with the Innies is probably a pretty telling sign also. So, and again, to segue very well here, speaking of flashes of Kier, boy, did we have a show from Kier himself and everyone's favorite floor manager, Mr. Milchick.
yeah, I love Milchick. He fluctuates in my like top one and two favorite characters of the show, partly because he's a phenomenal actor. And again, he should get kudos for the way he's performed in both seasons, because all the inner pain and the slight movements in his face really tell a story. Phenomenal actor. He stole the show in that last episode amongst a plethora of other very good actors, which is saying something. But yeah, that was a super interesting scene. I also found it interesting that they went with green and blue and not red and blue, which was the colors of the original chip. Interestingly enough, though, I have a question for you, Rob, because we haven't talked about this either. Do you think that the animatronic Kier was scripted? Was it AI? Is it consciousness? What is your theory? Because it was definitely a unique animatronic experience.
I will tell you, as someone who is a theme park fanatic, I have never seen an animatronic interaction quite like that. Because no, I don't think that everything was fully scripted. I mean, I think we all agree it wasn't fully scripted based on his reaction to. I like to call him Seth when he starts to kind of go out of turn like that instead of Mr. Milchick. So when Seth kind of took the barb at his height, given what his height was in real life, and his very pointed response, clearly was not a scripted interaction there. Now, there's also the possibility of just AI. It's definitely not a fully scripted, back and forth as Milchick was reading that card, but not convinced it's actually Kier in there at this point, like I kind of had started to at first, which is a little ridiculous now in hindsight.
Yeah, I don't know if it was that it was being controlled by Drummond, who was still alive at this point in the show, and he was just playing like a script, and it was going off a recording. And then as Seth threw the height dig over at him, Drummond took over, because there seemed to be a tone change, and that's kind of where people are like, oh, it could be AI because it's somewhat sentient in a way, and a created consciousness, like you said, which the AI and the created consciousness that they're building for Gemma isn't all that different of a thought process. You're kind of still creating life and a consciousness, so it could very well be some version of that. But it's also the way that Heliar was looking at the animatronic. It was looking back at her. It just seemed that there was something going on there. Like the soul and the eyes kind of analogy.
Like a level of
It was
recognition almost.
yeah. It just seemed like there was something more there, and I kind of hope there was. I hope it wasn't just drumming with a microphone in the background. I kind of hope there was a little something going on there. It would make for a more interesting story for me. However, there was something to be taken from the height barb that Seth gives to Kier, because it's not just that he's being rebellious. The fact that he's calling out his height as being a misrepresentation of who he was, I think that means that Milchick, or Seth in this version, his more badass self, knows that probably a lot of what Kier's saying is hyperbole and probably not all that real. So although he's a little bit of a zealot and he's in it to win it, it seems most of the time. I think the idea that he's taking his height and saying that there's the reflection of what you're showing us is just not true, I think resonated more than just his height, but it was more of him saying, like, I'm not sure if I believe everything that you say, and I think most of this was probably a bit exaggerated, but now I'm in it deep. And he might also kind of just like some of what the religion or the cult is giving him, which I think I have some thoughts on kind of that too, but we can go into that later.
Actually, no. I think this is a good way to kind of look at that now. Of obviously we know Lumon is the company. It's a branched off from the Ether factory. Obviously, it's progressed from Ether into the chips now and everything. But we've obviously been asking this question since episode 1 of this show, which is, what is Lumon's main goal? Are they really just functioning as a business? What's the point of the technology? But after what we've seen from this episode and from this season, Chris? Where's your head at?
Yeah, we had talked about this a few episodes back. There's still a few buttons to push. There's like the clean slate and the beehive, and there's a beehive poster in there. And we had talked about, we thought that the reason they're trying to push for legality is to have a lot of people use this technology to escape, the pain and just the things that they don't want to do in their everyday life. I think most people would accept this and take it because it would make their life easier, which is something that we do all the time, right? We accept certain levels of risk with our personal information and data on our phones and computers because it makes our life easier than it would be just to go to the bank and do something else, right? Like, humans generally do this. So I think they would take advantage of that because they know a vast majority of the population would take this chip, and then they could at one point turn on the Beehive initiative, and they basically have worker bees and drones out there.
I do think, yes, it is a goal of it. They're obviously making money. Yeah, they're rich as hell, man. Like, you see it. But the main goal, obviously, is they're still sticking to these Kier teachings and finding a way to do it without just straight cult like behavior, putting it into a business.
Yeah, I agree. We talked about the reasoning behind it, and there's been discussions on what the point of Cold Harbor was, and we all kind of figured it was going to be about the miscarriage because that's the most traumatic thing in Gemma's life, and if she can overcome that, then we know the chips are working 110%. And I gotta tell you, we talked about it a little bit. I'm not 100% sure why they considered it a failure, because she still didn't recognize the crib as being a problem, and she didn't recognize Mark. Whether as Miss Casey for a long time, even though Mark kind of had some stuff as he was making the clay tree, and he had some stuff trickling through, she didn't. And yes, she did trust him in the room, but I don't know if that was recognition of Mark or if it was just the situation she was in and she was scared. I think that what they were going to do was they were just going to remove the chip, because when those chips go in, the barbs pop out. I don't think there's a way to remove it without ripping brain tissue and essentially killing the person. And they were going to use that as the prototype for like a better chip that could have all these personalities. And since Jem is already dead out in the real world, there's no loss to them for Lumen. They don't have to explain human testing that inevitably was going to kill the person. It was 100% chance of
Right,
fatality.
right. To where and something else we've also said offline, they've still left it very open ended on how she ended up in Lumen's custody, if you will. Let's maybe put it that way. Whether it was by choice, whether she went voluntarily, or if they tricked her into it to going voluntarily, or maybe she did have the accident, as it's been stated, but they've again done this where they put the chip in place, maybe before she fully passed, and that's how they get away with saying, "Oh, it's testing. It was tested, but no one was harmed in the process, right? Because even if she passes at the end, she was already going to pass." They're doing the testing, making sure it's the efficacy test as they had James watch from his tiny little room. The other thing I would want to throw out there is I'm still slightly convinced they're testing that one and making sure that one is ready to go to be used for James' revolving ceremony. And I do think there is the possibility that, yes, the Kier animatronic was not Kier, but I do believe there's a bit of a Walt's frozen head scenario where they're trying to put the consciousness of James into another of these animatronics using that chip potentially.
I think that Gemma's accident and what happened was orchestrated. However, I don't, as some people think that Gemma was or Mark is like the Neo of this situation, like she is the one they needed. I think that she had gone through some trauma. She went to the fertility clinic. They got information on her physiology, and then they gave her this litmus test that she had to fill out. And I think psychologically, she went in a way that they wanted, and then they went ahead and moved to kidnap her for this test. I
Yeah,
don't think that there was like an overall plan at the blood drive because that was an annual university blood drive. So maybe Lumen, being Lumen, is just getting genetic information on people all the time. That could very well be true. However, I don't think there was anything in her blood that was particularly telling that said like, "Oh, we have to track this person down." I think it
right.
was
She wasn't the only
the
candidate.
trauma.
She was one of multiple potential candidates, and she happened to be in the right place at the wrong time, that she
Right.
ended up being the one that was used. Yeah.
That's kind of how I think happened. And to your point, maybe they either tricked her in there or not, or she could have very well just been knocked out from the accident. They go ahead and put the body in from the morgue, yada yada yada, because they had to have had a body prepared. Hence, I
Hmm.
think it was orchestrated. Right? They couldn't have had the accident, held everybody off for a long
Fair.
time, got a body. They
Yes.
had to have a body prepared to light this bad boy on fire and do the whole thing. So it could be that she was knocked out, or they just knocked her out, and then they woke her up and said, "Oh, you're going through treatment because you had a bad brain injury and we're here to help you and remember who you are," and stuff like that. And maybe that's how they started it off, because she's always like, "When can I see Mark? And when can I do this?" And it most likely was something to that effect. I doubt she would have left the house and asked Mark to go with her if she knew she was going to do something shady with Lumen and get into like a fake car accident and fake her death and stuff. She wouldn't have asked him to go at all when she left the house.
Yeah, I think you make a really valid point that, to me, at least the biggest one to me, is why would she ask Mark to go with her if she herself was in on staging it? One from season two, what's the deal with the MDR watchers? Because they're never typing anything, they're literally just watching these cameras, and also particularly why they look like the people they're watching. One theory that's kind of crossed our minds potentially is how sometimes someone gets trained by the person they're replacing before that person leaves. Maybe there's some semblance of making sure they have a backup somehow, at worst case scenario for these MDR team. But something to keep an eye on in season 3 as well. And the last kind of big third overarching question that we think still remains is, you heard our theories a little bit about what Lumen does and why they do it. But I think there's still more we could definitely glean from what's coming up in the future, but also what we've seen so far.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question's kind of like, why are they so worried about removing pain? Because, during the goat scene with Emil, um, it was that was what Drummond tells us it was all about, was that, to remove pain. And you got to figure, based off Kier's backstory, which we know a little bit of from the show, that he didn't have the best childhood, worked at some nasty places. His employers were beating people with table rods, child labor. He's going through it, and it seems most likely, at least to me, that because of all that and being someone that was going through the ringer and probably some abusive environments, that he developed some compartmentalization of these traumas and probably some sort of split personality disorder that I think he saw as an escape and then built this philosophy off that. Because right now, if you look, Lumen has always been in the business of removing pain, right? I mean, they were even the people in Salt's Neck, whether they're using the ether, for recreational use or for drug use, they're still escaping the world that they're in. And Lumen's a pharmaceutical company. Their job is to remove pain from them. So it seems a natural progression that Kier was going through some things and he fought off these tempers and his, in my opinion, fake brother Dieter. And that was all part of this personality disorder that he probably had. And he turned that into some sort of religion, and other people that are going through some things probably flocked and went on to that. Because if we look at the Innies, a lot of the Innies are Innies because of trauma or problems in their life. But I wouldn't say that it's that much different for the Milchicks and the Cobels of the world, that they're also trying to escape the problems and trauma in their life, but they're just doing it through the religion, through the cult of Kier, and not artificially through the chip. And now he wants to spread that, and the best way to do that is through the Severance chip. That's just how I see it.
Yeah, and I think I agree that the chip even shows that functionality through Bert, almost maybe more so than anyone else to this point, where he and Fields talk about his past he had and wanting to give him that new lease on life, if you will, and knowing it's kind of a separate person, but still giving them the ability to split off. One other thing I do want to call out, because you mentioned Emil and the goats, I think we can kind of put to rest the theories about what's going on with the goats, because from this episode seemed very evident to be spirit guides in a way, per this religion, that they are the ones to help whoever get to the afterlife, and that's why they are taking the lives of these baby goats at the same time that someone else is going to pass on. I don't think there's a huge conspiracy theory around it, or at least as big as of one as there seemed to be when we first saw Mammalians the Terrible.
In season one, they even said that the goat room that they saw, I think the showrunners had said it was more of just a side thing that they put into the show. And because we as the fandom, really latched onto it, I think they just went further with it. And by showing us this scene here with Drummond and the goat execution and the sacrifice, I think that's a way for them to finish that little plot point without having to drag it on all through season three. I mean, there could still be questions, but it for me, it just really brought to point that there's a lot of cult like religious stuff going on in the background. The way that she comes out dressed in more of like this, ceremonial outfit, and notice her pendant also had the six points on it, just like on the fork and the six bardos. There's probably something more to be said about that in season three, but I think it was just a way for them to end that storyline and give us an answer for what it was, because I don't think it was any more than what you talked about.
Absolutely, Chris. That's going to wrap it up for this episode. As usual, we want to hear your thoughts. If you've got a topic we didn't cover, drop it in the comments and we can discuss it further. Also, if this is your first show that you've been with us, and keep an eye out in the future for what we're going to cover more, even if it's not Severance. And if you like what we're doing, let us and the board, which completely forgot about the board. Yeah, let the board
Huge
know.
question.
Huge question. Maybe season 3. But let the board, in this case the algorithm, know by liking and subscribing. It really helps out the channel and we always appreciate it. So until next time, stay sleuthy.